Well, Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula has dismissed all rumours that airports have been closed. Just a short while ago, he gave an update on the travel restrictions on passenger travel. ENCA's Heidi Giokos was at that briefing. Let's get the latest from her now. Heidi, good evening. So I suppose that the major concern at the moment is how many flights have from high-risk countries landed here today and how many passengers on board those flights. Do we have some clarity?
Yes, indeed, Yvette, and I think it's crucial that we emphasize the fact that it is 270 South Africans who are on board on these various flights, and apparently they have been moved to a separate area, and 70 non-South Africans. We understand that the 70 non-South Africans were specifically on the Air China plane that came in at about 8:15 this morning. Some of the flights that landed from these high-risk countries include SAA. It's two of those planes, the one from, I think they're actually both from London, if I'm not mistaken. I'm struggling to read my own handwriting. British Airways, about two or three of those flights. We understand Virgin Atlantic, which came from the US, Lufthansa, which is Switzerland, Air France and Alitalia, which is Italy. So all these flights have come from high-risk countries, and this is why they were then parked at a separate parking bay. South Africans were allowed to disembark, and the non-South African citizens were then they remained on the plane, and they had to then move. The planes then had to leave back to the destinations that they came from only when there was a line available for them, given the fact that they all arrived at different times, and they needed to make sure that the air traffic worked in order for these various flights to go back. We're looking at 20 flights that landed from these high-risk countries.
Well, Heidi, I want to talk just now about what happens to those South Africans who've come off those flights now, but I suppose the question is, and what we've been trying to figure out here, behind the scenes chatting, is why did these flights actually leave? Why did they land here knowing that we had instituted this ban? And I think that happened on Tuesday night when that presser had happened. So did the minister give any clarity as to, how they even started, how they even got in the air after we had announced our restrictions?
Exactly, Yvette, and it's such a vital question, and it's something that we pose to the minister to say, why are you even allowing these aircraft into South Africa, given the fact that there is a strict instruction from the President that there is a travel ban? But the reason that we're getting from the Minister of Transport is that they cannot restrict South Africans from trying to come back into the country. There are South Africans stuck in various countries, and they want to come back home, given what is going on here and going on across the globe. But also the Minister indicating that the regulation does not stipulate that they have to bar certain aircraft or certain airline, but they are not allowed the citizens into the country. So the issue here is the citizens aren't allowed in, but the aircraft are allowed in. But he's reassuring South Africans to say that whichever citizen comes from any of these high-risk countries, they are not allowed into South Africa. They will not disembark those planes, and for future aircraft coming in, the same will apply. He says they are in discussions to discuss whether or not these aircraft should be banned completely, but that will be quite tricky given the fact that it will stop aviation completely. But we are seeing this trend across the globe, given the fact that the coronavirus is spreading drastically, specifically when it comes to travellers. And that's what we saw here in South Africa. Most of our cases speak to travellers coming back from these high-risk countries and not necessarily local transmission.
So what's happened now to these South African passengers who were allowed to get off these flights? Where are they at the moment, and what are the precautions around them?
So we have 270 South Africans who have landed today from these high-risk countries, and from our understanding, the minister was unable to give a very clear picture as to what's set to happen to them, but we understand that they have been handed over to the Department of Health, and they have been put in a separate area. We understand it's not at the airport, but they will basically be tested and quarantined, because one must remember, Yveka, that they might be testing negative for the coronavirus now, but in 14 days they might be showing symptoms or be tested positive for this virus, and that is a big risk. This is why government needs to make sure that they deal with these South Africans coming back from these high-risk countries to ensure that they're quarantined, and hopefully we'll get an indication from the department tomorrow as to what they plan on doing and where they're being quarantined.
Yeah, because that would be a lot of passengers, like you say, 270, if I heard you correctly, Heidi. So what now? What have we learned from this, and what does it mean for future flights?
Exactly. So I think for future flights, it's imperative for South Africans who are in these high-risk countries wanting to come back, that if you are South African, you will be allowed to come back into the country, but you will undergo a process from the Department of Health. You'll be tested. You'll most likely be quarantined. But anybody on board on these high-risk country aircraft will not be allowed back into the country. And many are trying to connect via South Africa, but this also seems to be a major issue because other African countries have completely shut down their airports. This is not the case in South Africa. Our airport is still functional and operating, but it will be very difficult for these citizens to come out of those aircraft and try and connect to another flight. They will not be allowed out, but the aircraft, however, will still be allowed to land in South Africa, but will be dealt with through those steps.
Okay, so it's been a very long day in the air for some of these passengers, especially those on those high-risk flights. Thanks very much, Heidi Giocos there.